අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නායට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා. අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නායට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා.
නව පෑස් සබන් සහ ක්‍රීම් ජාත්‍යන්තර ළමා රෝග පිළිබඳ විශේෂඥයන් විසින් සායනිකව තහවුරු කරලා තියෙන්නේ.
Tonight, don't step out. The president's emergency declaration attracts the ire of the country's legal fraternity.
Now, we can only speculate about this. It is likely that the president might try to make a emergency regulation saying that street protests are banned.
Reform now. Former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe offers his economic to-do list to the government.
I have said we need a consortium. India, China, Japan, EU and South Korea.
On the way down, the Public Utilities Commission announces a further reduction to the country's days of darkness. Up to the challenge. Business sentiment grows for the fourth straight month despite economic doom and gloom. All this and much more coming up on First at 9 this Saturday, the 2nd of April 2022.
Life boy shampoo chunti rupiah 70යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening. Bringing you the latest news from the island tonight. This is First at 9 and I'm David Ebert. The environment in the country remains tense today as well after the night of protest across Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is currently under a state of public emergency that was declared by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa last night and as of 6 p.m. this evening under an island-wide curfew that will stay in effect until 6 a.m. on Monday. The move has attracted criticism by the Bar Association of Sri Lanka that has called on the President to immediately revoke it, saying that it is not the answer to the country's current problems.
A state of public emergency was declared last night through an extraordinary gazette that was issued by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and will remain in effect until further notice. According to the gazette, the president has taken the decision to ensure public security, to protect public order, and to maintain supplies and services essential to the life of the people. Meanwhile, the Department of Government Information announced today that an island-wide curfew will be in effect from 6 p.m. tonight until 6 a.m. on Monday, the 4th of April. President's counsel Sarath Jayamana believes that the move may have been to stifle a mass protest scheduled to take place tomorrow.
We do not know whether it is a police curfew or whether those curfew has been imposed acting under the emergency regulations. If so, by now we must have emergency regulations. In the public domain, there was a talk that tomorrow there will be some protests from various quarters. Probably in order to curtail those protests, they may have introduced this emergency regulation.
With that, the Bar Association of Sri Lanka was quick to express its concern over the president's declaration and urged him to revoke it immediately. In its letter, the BASL says that it believes that this is not the answer to the situation in the country, citing the spate of protests the island has seen in the past few days. It also accuses the government of having failed to understand and empathize with the people suffering and of also taking away the fundamental right to dissent. The bar also warns the public to engage only in peaceful protests and to be wary of elements who seek to cause violence and destruction in order to strengthen the hand of those who wish to suppress the freedom of expression and assembly. All acts of violence and destruction during a protest, be it towards private or public property, cannot be condoned and must only be condemned, it added. Speaking to AdaDerana English News, Attorney at Law Tishya Veragodu explained what a public emergency means for the people.
It is only for a period of 1 month and it will lapse thereafter, and it has to be forthwith communicated to the parliament, and if the parliament approves it, only the 1 month period will count. If the parliament rejects it, immediately the emergency will lapse. Or if the parliament does not approve it and it is kept in abeyance after 14 days, it will still lapse. So in this context, right now saying that the country is in a state of emergency means very little unless and until His Excellency the President promulgates some sort of emergency regulations. Now, we can only speculate about this because we do not know what His Excellency the President would do. It is likely that the President might try to make a emergency regulations saying that street protests are banned. Unlikely that the Supreme Court would hold that that is legal. There's a very famous authority, Surera Besekara versus Arya Rubasinghe, where the Supreme Court has already reviewed this issue and held that emergency regulations are subject to the Constitution, and if it is constitutionally overbroad, it can be struck down.
He also went on to explain how and what people can do if they are faced with any form of police torture.
The police might try to justify assault by saying that it was for legitimate purposes, it was during the course of arrest. But generally, your injuries would suggest otherwise, because a medical doctor would be able to identify what was caused during the use of exercise of necessary force as opposed to beating and torture. It is important that if you are subjected to any torture during the police raids or if you are harassed, immediately get yourself admitted to a hospital, get your injuries recorded, make sure that that is done properly, seek legal aid. Of course, if you're assaulted and you sustain injuries, you're entitled to seek damages in the district court action. You're entitled to file a fundamental rights application. You're entitled to go before the Human Rights Commission. Putting pressure back on them, saying that you touch me, I will take you to court, would possibly result with police officers also being cautious.
In the meantime, US Ambassador to Sri Lanka Julie Chung took to social media today to offer a reminder of the importance of the right to democratic expression, adding that the US was watching the situation closely. The US envoy called for restraint from all sides and stated that she hoped Sri Lanka would see some much-needed economic stability and relief for everyone at the receiving end. In addition, British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka Sarah Houlton expressed her concern over reports of the use of force against journalists and protesters and the recently imposed emergency laws, as she went on to say that peaceful protests are a citizen's right and an essential part of democracy.
Now, in the aftermath of the protests carried out near President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's private residence in Mirihana, over 50 people were arrested. However, after over 100 attorneys appeared on behalf of the arrested and argued that they were arrested on charges without sufficient evidence, the Gangodawila Magistrates Court granted bail to 15 out of the 21. The remaining 6 have been remanded until Monday.
In the wake of the protests carried out near President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's private residence in Mirihana, on Thursday night, 53 protesters had been arrested, while properties were damaged and people were injured as well. Of the 53 protesters that had been arrested, 21 were produced before the Gangodawila Magistrates Court yesterday. Following this, over 100 lawyers, including President's counsels, arrived to appear for the protesters in court. From the 21 produced in court, 15 were released on bail, while the remaining 6 have been placed in remand custody until Monday the 4th of April. Speaking to media following the court proceedings, President's counsel Senarath Jayamana said that the attorneys had argued that due to the lack of evidence to support the allegations under which they were charged, it is wrong to arrest the suspects. He went on to say that the magistrate had accepted the argument and thus proceeded to grant bail to the suspects. In the meantime, AdaDerana correspondent Sumedha Sanjeeva, who is currently receiving treatment at the Kalubowila Hospital for injuries he sustained during the protest, had also been granted bail. Meanwhile, Acting Magistrate of Mount Lavinia Ravi Muthugama visited the Kalubowila Hospital to inspect all those injured and receiving treatment under police guard. 23 injured protesters at the Kalubowila Hospital and 3 at the Colombo National Hospital were ordered to be remanded until the 4th of this month. In the meantime, protests were carried out at various locations in the island against the police brutality during the protest in Mirihana.
Former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has called for the government to look at gathering together a consortium of countries that could help the island out of its economic quagmire. Speaking to Indiwari Amuwatta on our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24 earlier this week, Wickremesinghe advised the government to also revert back to a market economy, implement the structural reforms and bring in a relief budget to ease pressure on the public. Right now, Sri Lanka faces a stiff task of juggling what the International Monetary Fund terms dangerously unsustainable debt and forecasts for low growth in the next 5 years. Its Article 4 consultation report also highlights 2 significant high domestic risk factors adding pressure to an already constrained economy, namely more binding fiscal and balance of payment financing constraints than previously envisaged and a worse than anticipated high impact of the temporary chemical fertilizer ban. The IMF's report also adds that Sri Lanka's contingent liabilities are substantial, adding up to a total of 15.8% of GDP. Further, the report adds that Sri Lanka is hence unable to refinance its debt in an orderly manner. However, the country's central bank disagrees with the IMF, calling their take on the situation overly pessimistic and continues to insist that the balance of payments problem is only temporary. With IMF talks due in just over a week from now, the government is faced with another major decision of which path to choose from between the two, the IMF's or the central bank's version of Sri Lanka's economic reality. UNP leader Ranil Wickremesinghe says that the government needs to immediately bring about vital structural changes before IMF talks.
Our banks, there's a whole question of the quality of assets. Because you have moratorium, at the moment you don't put the non-performing loans. This is just like a mist. The moment it comes off, some of the banks will be at risk, especially looking at the foreign loans, the conversions. If that collapses, the total economy collapses. Then when you are doing adjustments, there will always be a group that will be vulnerable and they will get hurt. So to prevent that, you have to have a new budget, which is a relief-oriented budget and not a development-oriented budget. If you do this, then I would say first issue is where do we find the money and where do we go for rescheduling of our debts. Now that's difficult, rescheduling the foreign debts. So let's start with that. I have said we need a consortium. India, China, Japan, EU and South Korea. And we have to talk with them and the IMF to help us out, because we have got about $1.5 billion from India. I think it will do sufficient for the fuel requirements until end of April, early May. What's happened is there's a gap now. I was told when I came in here that there will be no diesel available till the 5th, whether it be for bus transport, hospitals or others. So now we've got to intervene on that type of affairs. So what can happen in the overall economy is when the Indian money is over, there's a blank. Now we have also talked to China to get about $2.5 billion, $1 billion for financing facilities and $1.5 billion for buyer's credit. So this can go to a certain extent. Then we have to make payment of $1 billion for the sovereign bonds, and we have to now look at how can we increase our foreign exchange earning. But for that we must come back to a market economy, and you have to build sufficient confidence in the people. There's a certain amount of money that our own enterprises are holding abroad. I don't blame them, because in this situation inflation is 50 to 60%, you will hold your money abroad, you won't bring it in. So once you create confidence, it's they who start bringing the money in first. So it's a range of activities. You have to bring some new legislation, and that will help us to get the assistance from the IMF, work together with the IMF.
With IMF calls for the government to implement a much broader social security net as well, questions over how it will finance such an endeavour still remain. Wickremesinghe points out that such a program in the form of a relief budget must be continued for at least 2 years before any changes can be made.
You say relief over development now, but you haven't been a fan of relief-oriented economy. But now, is this sustainable for Sri Lanka?
You need stability to carry out reforms. You can't have stability if people have to take only one meal a day or they are starving. But the reforms are structural reforms, and those are being enacted by the government. We change the laws, we decide that we'll open up, as they have said, you can't be cutting down on imports, restricting your debt, increasing your taxes while you are doing that. So that will take the economy forward. You don't need anything else for development for the first 2 years. And as you get confidence, money will keep coming into Sri Lanka. Then what do you do to the people who are affected? You have to give them relief, and they must take it off this budget. So what is development work we have is all concrete. All the unnecessary expenditure should be cut. I am not saying to reduce the budget. Cut the unnecessary expenditure and move it to relief. Even for 2 years we should have a relief budget till the situation stabilizes.
And we'll be back with more local stories right after this break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party has decided to urge President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to form a caretaker government after holding talks with all political parties. The decision was taken at the SLFP's Central Committee meeting convened last evening at the party headquarters amidst the rolling power interruptions. Speaking to the media following the meeting, SLFP's Senior Vice President Professor Rohana Lakshman Piyadasa said that the party's Central Committee members had unanimously voiced their displeasure with while remaining in the government alliance. He added that the Central Committee has also decided to let party leader, former President Maithripala Sirisena, to take a decision in this regard. Meanwhile, SLFP leader Maithripala Sirisena told the media that the party intends to hand over a letter to the president detailing its stance and its requests pertaining to the current situation. Party General Secretary State Minister Dayasiri Jayasekara meanwhile stated that SLFP members would be compelled to step down from their ministerial portfolios if the government fails to take necessary action. State Minister of Provincial Councils and Local Government Roshan Ranasinghe has written to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa informing him of his intention to resign from his portfolio from the 1st of May. He has cited the failure of the organic agriculture push and resultant low harvest yields as some of the reasons for this decision. State Minister Roshan Ranasinghe has announced that he plans to resign his portfolio of State Minister of Provincial Councils and Local Government with effect from the 1st of May. Conveying his decision to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in a letter today, the State Minister said he would also resign as the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna Polonnaruwa district organizer as well. In his letter, he urged the President to provide the 100 rupee per kilogram compensation for damaged paddy crops, as well as a fertilizer subsidy to the farmers before the Sinhala and Tamil New Year. He also cited the controversial chemical fertilizer ban that faced much opposition from the majority of the farming community, saying that despite pledges, only a few received organic fertilizer of proper standards. He also cited low yields experienced by farmers, estimating a 2,000 to 2,500 kilogram drop during the Maha season for contributing towards the loss of popularity of the government within such a short period of time. This was also enhanced by the failure of the government's campaign to promote organic fertilizer, he concluded. Now the public can expect a certain degree of relief tomorrow in terms of power interruptions, as the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka announced that there will be power cuts for just 6 hours tomorrow. In addition, the Commission's request to declare early school holidays starting from the 4th of April received a positive response from the Ministry of Education today, as the ministry gave the principals the authority to decide when to give holidays.
A vessel carrying 40,000 metric tons of diesel arrived at the Colombo port today. The consignment was received under the $500 million Indian line of credit. The diesel shipment was ceremoniously handed over by Indian High Commissioner Gopal Bagle to Minister of Energy Gamini Lokugate this afternoon. As such, the unloading of diesel at the Kolonnawa terminal commenced this afternoon. It is reported that diesel will be distributed island-wide tonight. Further, 2 more vessels carrying consignments of diesel under the Indian line of credit are scheduled to arrive in the country on the 4th and the 5th of this month. Meanwhile, due to the dollar crisis, the vessel carrying diesel anchored off the coast of Sri Lanka still remains unloaded, as authorities have failed to secure $52 million needed to pay for it. However, the Ministry of Energy states that they hope to make the payment and procure the consignment of fuel aboard the vessel soon. In the meantime, the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka approved power cuts of 6 hours for tomorrow, as requested by the Ceylon Electricity Board. The CB had requested interruptions to the electricity supply due to the limited supply of fuel for thermal power plants. Further, the PUCSL's request to declare early school holidays for the month of April has received a response from the Ministry of Education. The electricity regulator had called for school holidays starting from the 4th of April, as the students are inconvenienced owing to the lengthy power interruptions. As such, the Ministry of Education issued a circular giving the principals of government and private schools the power to decide on when they would declare school holidays.
Now, Sri Lanka's former ambassador to the United States and Mexico, Jalia Wickramasuriya, has pleaded guilty to charges of attempting to embezzle over $300,000 through a Sri Lankan government purchase of a new embassy building in 2013. The charges carry a statutory maximum sentence of 5 years in prison and potential financial penalties, the US Justice Department has said.
Sri Lanka's ambassador to the United States from 2008 to 2014, Jalia Wickramasuriya, pleaded guilty today to diverting and attempting to embezzle $332,027 from the government of Sri Lanka during the 2013 purchase of a new embassy building in Washington, D.C., the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia has announced. The charge carries a statutory minimum of 5 years in prison and potential financial penalties, the US Justice Department said. According to court documents, in 2013, Wickramasuriya devised a scheme to defraud the Sri Lankan government by inflating the price of its new embassy by $332,027 and then diverting the funds from the government to 2 companies that had no role in the real estate transaction. Later in the same year, Wickremesuriya redirected an equal amount of funds back to the Sri Lankan government accounts, leaving the government with no loss, the US State Department explained further. Back in 2005, Wickremesuriya was appointed Consul General of Sri Lanka in Los Angeles, California, until his 2008 promotion as the country's ambassador to the United States and Mexico. His tenure saw some controversy when he was investigated by the US Inland Revenue Service for tax evasion, which led to the US government requesting his recall by the Sri Lankan government. He returned to Sri Lanka in 2014 and the government appointed a temporary official until Ambassador Prasad Karyavasam took over duties.
Welcome back. The central bank says that its continued spot inspection of authorized money changers have netted 2 more institutions that were offering higher exchange rates than commercial banks were offering. Posting a notice on its official website, the central bank announced that authorized money changers Swiss Money Exchange at Colombo 1 and 6, as well as Western Money Exchange also in Colombo 6, were found to be in violation of directions issued to them under the Foreign Exchange Act No. 12 of 2017. It added that warning notices have been issued to the 2 money changers, ordering them to comply with the relevant directions with immediate effect. The central bank explains that failure by the 2 companies to do so would end up in a suspension of the exchange permits. On Thursday, the central bank suspended the permit of another money changer, Prasanna Money Exchange, for the same violation. Now, despite the massive challenges in the country, the business community does not seem to be slowing down and is taking a long-term view, says the Slim Nielsen IQ Business Confidence Index report for the month of March. The index has seen an 8-point gain last month and is the 4th month of gain seen. However, it warns that until there is a revival of the economy and an easing of the forex-related restrictions, this level of confidence will be hard to maintain. The Slim Nielsen IQ Business Confidence Index has registered a notable gain of 8 basis points last month, despite what it described as a topsy-turvy operating environment. This represents an 11-month high and sees the index edge closer to where it stood before last April's 3rd wave of the virus, after which lockdowns and travel restrictions were imposed. Nielsen IQ's Director Consumer Insights, Terikami Anadenia, stated that despite the perilous state of the economy, business seems to have started to pick up and there's hope on the horizon once again. She added that despite the rise in inflation and shortages, businesses are reporting an improvement in sales volumes over the last 3 to 12 months, and they remain optimistic about a better tomorrow. In terms of sensitivities, the report cites countless downside risks that still remain for both the economy and political landscape, which cast a shadow over the index's resurgence in recent months, even though the business community seems to be taking a more long-term view of the future. The price of oil, the value of the Sri Lankan rupee, ongoing power and forex crises, and the prospect of political upheaval remain near-term sensitivities, the report states. It also warns that until there's a revival of Sri Lanka's economy and an easing of the forex-related restrictions, this level of confidence will be hard to maintain. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.